everyone. Welcome to this week's session of the Educator Helpline from the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. My name is Kristen Gehring and I am the Marine Education Assistant at the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. Now, typically these weekly Educator Helplines have been a place where we share resources and lesson plans and activities for you to do in the comfort of your own home. But this week we decided to switch things up a little bit. You might notice I am not in the office. I don't know about you guys, but I have been feeling a little stir crazy these days. And even getting out to the office, while a welcome change, it was still indoors. And with the weather as nice as it has been these past couple months, honestly, it's about time we get outdoors, especially as school is wrapping up and we're getting into the summer months. We wanted to share one of our local habitats with you, one that's really, really special to us at South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium and to, I would venture a guess, to most people in the low country. It's one that you'll see all around you. We have more than 350,000 acres of this type of habitat in South Carolina, and I'm going to give you a moment to guess what that habitat is that is really special to the low country and has a huge amount of area, 350,000 acres in South Carolina. Any guesses? All right. I'm not seeing any guesses, but if you were thinking the salt marsh, you'd be absolutely right. Now today, the salt marsh that I'm located in is right next to Fort Johnson, which is the site of a bunch of different acronym organizations. It's kind of an alphabet soup over here. There's 5 different organizations and institutions that have facilities on this site. I'm going to list the acronyms and see if you can name what those organizations are. We have SCDNR, hence this hat. Thanks for letting us use your site behind the education quarters here on Fort Johnson. So SCDNR, we have NOAA, N-O-A-A, we have NIST, N-I-S-T, CFC, and MUSC. So all 5 of those organizations have facilities here at Fort Johnson, and they do a lot of work together. Now, if you can think of what those acronyms stand for, go ahead and put those in the comments. I'm going to talk a little bit, give you some time to figure out what those acronyms are. If you know all 5, good for you. If you know a couple, that's still really great. It's a lot of acronyms to remember in local governments and in academic organizations, which maybe will give you a couple clues there. So all of those organizations are invested in protecting and studying this habitat and other marine resources that we rely on here in the low country, and what the rest of the state and the country relies on as well, whether or not they're directly connected to them. So there's a lot of really cool research that goes on here. Some medical information happens, some purely biological or chemical things just from that habitat that's next to me. I'll show you it in a second instead of just pointing to it. I know you're itching to see this habitat. And they also work to regulate and protect the habitat as well as other habitats around our state. All right, so those 5 organizations, I'm going to put you to the test. Let's see if you got them. We had SCDNR, that is the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. Next, we had NOAA, N-O-A-A. We have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We have NIST, which was the National Institute for Standards and Technology. That one's a really hard one. CFC, hopefully if you're from Charleston or the Low Country, that one should have been an easy one. That was the College of Charleston. And then MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina. So all 5 of those institutions and organizations have sites on this campus and work together to try to get the best information, the best science done that they possibly can. All right, now I said that we were at a really important habitat with more than 350,000 acres in South Carolina. And that habitat is, drumroll please, you can't see my drumroll please, that is the salt marsh. It's a really, really great habitat. It is one of the most productive habitats on the planet along the lines of rainforests and coral reefs in its ability to produce energy, which is a really impressive feat. And in South Carolina, we have one of the largest areas of salt marsh in the United States, especially on the East Coast. And that is something that we're really, really proud of and that we want to make sure that everyone appreciates and really understands why it's so special, because a lot of times people might drive past the marsh and just notice the smell and not realize how important it is to them. All right, so without further ado, let's actually look at the marsh. I'm gonna take you on the road here I'm streaming from my phone today instead of from the comfort of the office, so apologies if it's a little shaky or if it has some issues with the quality, like that. Here we go. All right, so let's go see the marsh. Right, like I said, we are at Fort Johnson, which is, we're behind the DNR education offices, and they have pretty much the best view at work of anyone that I know. Behind me you can see the Ravenel Bridge. Over behind me now is downtown Charleston. So it's an amazing, amazing view. They are some seriously lucky people who work at DNR. So this is the salt marsh here. Now, a couple of characteristics of a salt marsh. A salt marsh is bordered by an estuary, which you can see behind me. An estuary is where freshwater and salt water mix and form brackish water. Now here the salt water is coming from the Atlantic Ocean, and the fresh water in our estuary, the Charleston Harbor, is coming from the Ashley, Cooper, Wando, and a little bit from the Stono rivers as well. And those mix and form sort of salty, sort of fresh water, somewhere between fresh water and ocean water in its salinity or content of salt. And then on the other side of the estuary is our upland region, our slightly higher elevation region. You can see down on the ground are sort of scrubby vegetation that are a little shorter. You also have pretty dry soil there. And so that's going to be the upland area and the estuary behind me. In between those two, we have our marsh. So when you look at a marsh, you might see mostly just one thing. That thing is green at this time of year, brown in the winter. Does anybody know what that thing is? Put it in the comments. Give you a hint. I'm going to turn to what I'm looking at. Here we go. This is the devil right here. This is the plant of the hour. One of our favorite things here at Sea Grant. This is Spartina alterniflora, or Spirabolus alterniflora, depending on who you ask. Believe it or not, there's quite a bit of the community about taxonomy and about naming things. So depending on who you ask and how it fits genetic research, this might be in a different family, might not be Spartina, but I think Spartina sounds nicer, and until they settle on a final answer, I'm going to keep calling it Spartina. All right, so we have our Spartina. That Spartina is growing down in the pluff mud. I mentioned you might have smelled a marsh when you walked by it. That is that pluff mud. Now, right now, a lot of the pluff mud is actually, I don't know if you can tell that, but a lot of the marsh is covered right now by the tide. In Charleston, we have 2 tides each day, 2 high tides and 2 low tides. That's called semi-diurnal tides. So that semi-diurnal tide, what that means is it comes in, has 2 high tides, and then it comes out, has 2 low tides. So high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide, all in the span of 24 hours. That's a lot of change that the marsh goes through in a single day period. And so all of the things that live in the marsh have to be really well adapted to living in that really dynamic, changing ecosystem. So in that pluff mud, it might look kind of brown. It's very, very fine sediment, and it has a lot of nutrients that are coming with those tides coming in and out and form the basis for this really productive ecosystem. Spartina that grows in that pluff mud is a really, really dynamic plant. It looks like it's just sitting there. Don't believe it. It's a koi devil. It is constantly excreting salt. Gardeners, but if you put salt on your plants, they'll be happy with you. They do not like to be salt ridden. So if you can think about back in the day when would salt the earth from growing for a long period of time. So the fact that we have living in the marsh that are constantly flooded with salt water is really impressive. And the way that the Spartina does this is by excreting, by putting it out of their leaves. I'm going to turn you around again. And if you were here with me, if you were able to feel this blade of Spartina, you would feel the salt on your fingers. You could feel it as it excretes, which is a really, really impressive thing. That Spartina is making sure that it can get the fresh water without getting too much salt in its tissues and in its body. On that Spartina, I should have stayed with that one because it actually had exactly what I was about to talk about. Spartina forms the basis for this ecosystem and has all kinds of... All right, this little one right here, we have a periwinkle snail. This periwinkle snail is pretty small right now. They can get about an inch or so long, about yay big. And that Spartina forms the habitat for that periwinkle snail. Periwinkle snails can crawl up and down a single blade of Spartina. In fact, some periwinkle snails might spend their entire life on just one blade of grass. So as they climb up and down, they are eating algae off of the surface of that Spartina. They're getting all the nutrients that they need in order to live in the marsh. Now, another cool plant that we have here is our sea oxeye daisies. So you can see those pretty yellow flowers. Those are going to grow in the upland areas here. So they're not constantly getting flooded, but they might get a little bit here and there. And you'll see them sort of on that upland border in the high marsh. Very pretty flowers. There's some really nice butterflies that come and pollinate those. And right now we've got some, it looks like some bees flying around. Probably can't see those with my camera, but believe me, they're there. The biodiversity in the salt marsh is really, really impressive. Because it has such a great energy producing ability, it can form the habitat for a huge diversity of life and huge numbers of living creatures as well. I'm going to zoom you in one more time on the ground here. See if we can find any of our friends. They were just crawling around. All right, coming out of the grass there, you might see an arthropod. Let's move through. You'll see them moving as I get close. Any guesses of what those little scurrying arthropods are? All right, if you said crab, you're right. If you said blue crab, you're probably not right, but they do live here, so good guess. If you said fiddler crab, you're probably the most correct. That is one of the most common crabs that you can find out here in the marsh. But you might also see some squareback marsh crabs. Now before we started this session, I went out and grabbed a couple of critters, so I'm going to take you back over to my temporary outdoor classroom here and set you down so we can take a closer look at them. Bear with me. All right, so like I said, there's a couple different kinds of crabs that you might find out in the marsh. I mentioned fiddler crabs. Those are the ones that you'll see the most of, scurrying into those little holes. Now looking at fiddler crabs, we got one right here. This one has two small claws in the front there. Now take a guess. Is this a female or a male fiddler crab? For comparison, this is also a fiddler crab. Let's see if I can get it to turn around. Maybe. It is not cooperating. There we go. Perfect, right into that water. All right, this fiddler crab has one large front claw and one small front claw, and that's where they get that name fiddler crab. Looks like they're playing a big fiddle, or somebody thought that. They wave that big claw around like they're playing the fiddle. So, which one was the female? Was it this one with the small claws? Or was it this one with one large claw and one big claw? Play some Jeopardy music here. Do, 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 do. All right, if you said the one with two small claws was a female, you're right. She's giving you a cheerleader wave right now, going woo. So that one is the female. If you see a fiddler crab with one large claw and one small claw, that is the male fiddler crab. Now what do those male fiddler crabs use that big claw for, you might ask? Or maybe you already know, in which case, good for you. So that male fiddler crab has that one large claw, and the primary use is gonna be and say, hey ladies, how you doing? You wanna come over to my burrow? It's a really nice burrow. We can have some fun. So they're gonna wave that claw around and try to entice the females to come over to them so they can mate. Believe it or not, that claw is not always going to be on the right, it's not always going to be on the left. So they can lose that large claw and then regrow it on the opposite side. So that same fiddler crab might be right-handed 1 week, and then as it molts, it will grow a big claw on the left if it loses that right big claw. Speaking of molts, looking around the marsh, you might find some evidence of crabs. That would be, let's see if I can get it to focus, molts like this. This is not a live crab, it's just a shell that it left behind. They are arthropods, and so as they grow, they have that hard exoskeleton that they need to leave behind as they get larger. Otherwise, they kind of run out of space. So you can find molts like that. You can also find parts like this. Now this is from a much larger species of crab, one that you may have tasted before, that is pretty delicious. This is from either a blue crab or a lesser blue crab, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that it's a blue crab. So this right here is from a blue crab. This could have been molt, but more likely this is an instance of predation. So this is likely left over from something that ate this crab. And the reason that I say that is because it looks like there is still some tissue inside, meaning that it didn't just leave the whole shell behind, something took out what was inside. Which is, you know, unfortunate for this crab, but it is a really important part of life here in the salt marsh. Part of being a really biodiverse community is having a lot of levels to the food chain. So if that was not the top of the food chain, apparently, you have to think about what would be on that next level of the food chain. But before we get to that, we're not done with crabs yet. There's a lot of crabs here, and I'm a big fan of them. Now this one right here, this is, see if he'll come where we can see him. This one is a square-backed marsh crab. So that square-backed marsh crab is named very creatively. It has a square back. I'm going to actually zoom you in here so you can see what I'm talking about, because it's a little hard to see through the container. But it has a very square back to its carapace. So if you see one that looks like that, that is a square-backed marsh crab. In comparison, we have our fiddler crab that's more rounded, and our male fiddler crab here with that more rounded back carapace. So if we look back at our molt here that I was showing you, I would guess that that is a molt from a squareback marsh crab. And our last kind of crab, at least that I'm going to talk about today, is this one right here. Doesn't really look like a crab, does it? But inside here, hiding very effectively, is a striped hermit crab. I'm gonna put it back in to its container to see if maybe it'll come out to the point where we can actually see it. But that shell has a striped hermit crab inside of it. If you ever go to the beach and like to go shelling, be really careful about what you bring home, because you might not notice, even if you look inside and you're carefully checking to make sure that you didn't accidentally bring home something live, those hermit crabs are really effective at hiding from predators, and we're pretty big animals that they would not really want to run into, and so they're going to hide inside of that shell. I was on the beach shelling one time and I had a shell in my pocket that I thought was just a moon snail shell. I was like, wow, it's a whole moon snail shell. I always find them broken, but it was like perfect. And so I wanted to take it home with me. And then as it was in my pocket, I started to feel this little prickly sensation, and I realized before I left the beach, luckily, that it had somebody living inside of it. It was not an empty shell. So I put that guy back on the beach. So be careful what you bring home. If I had actually brought it home with me, especially if I had left it in that pocket, I would have realized pretty quick based on the smell, and it would not have been very pleasant for me in the long run, or for that hermit crab. So that hermit crab, let's see, he's coming out right now. See if I can sneak up on him with the camera. I say he, but I don't actually know if it's a he or she. You can start to see just those little legs poking out. And we have our little hermit crab friend coming to make an appearance. Alright, now I got a question that said, why don't hermit crabs make their own shell? So they actually do still have their own shell, believe it or not. So just like the other crabs that have that carapace that they molt, hermit crabs still have that same carapace, but they've developed another layer of protection. The shells that mollusks, like that looks like a whelk, maybe a very worn down whelk shell, like that snail that built that shell, those shells are really, really hard. So if we think back to our periwinkle snail, I have another one right here. This periwinkle snail made its own shell. And that shell stays with it its whole life. They don't get to make a new shell. They don't get to leave their shell and find a new one like hermit crabs do as they grow. Periwinkle snails will add on and add on and add on to their shell as they grow, and after they die, they leave that shell behind. Animals like the hermit crab can find those shells, and it's a really effective form of protection. Their carapace is kind of a funky shape. They actually have a hook at the end of it to hold on to the inside of that snail shell that spirals around. And so they do make their own shell. They still molt their own shell and carry it around with them all the time, but then they have that secondary layer of protection from that mollusk shell, from that snail shell. They're really impressive animals. All right, so those are all the crabs that I have for you today. But speaking of predation, speaking of hiding from predators, let's go up a layer of the food chain, a level of that food chain. So what do you think they're hiding from? Why do you think ate that blue crab? Or what is that hermit crab hiding from? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. I already told you one predator for the blue crab. You might have eaten it, but that's probably not what the hermit crab is hiding from. I don't think you could get a whole lot from a hermit crab. All right, a lot of these hermit crabs or blue crabs or even fiddler crabs, what they're looking out for primarily is birds. There are a lot of birds of prey that live in the salt marsh. Earlier I saw a hawk flying around. It's not out right this second, but you'll see hawks, you'll see ospreys, you can see some eagles sometimes. And then there's the ones that you would naturally think of in the salt marsh or at the beach, like gulls and terns and ibises and egrets and herons and pelicans. Pelicans probably aren't going for crabs, but they are still here in the salt marsh. So birds are a huge predator for a lot of small organisms that live in the marsh. So they have to find places to hide, which is what that Spartina is really great for, or they can hide in their burrows, like the fiddler crabs, or in their shells, like the hermit crab. So they have all kind of adapted to this life. The fiddler crabs and the marsh crabs that have to hide in the marsh, in the grasses itself, on the ground, they've developed a really cool adaptation. I mentioned their burrows. What they'll do, crabs do have gills, so they can breathe when they're submerged, but they want to protect their burrows so they're not completely under the water. So they'll kind of build a little door almost with the sand. So they'll come up, you'll see little pellets of sand all over at low tide. I think they're pretty much all covered right now. The tide is pretty far in, but you'll see all these little tiny pellets, and that's the crabs that come up and they eat all the algae and stuff that's living on the sand, spit out those pellets, and they can use those pellets to actually create a dome or a barrier over the hole on top of their burrow. So it's very, very cool. All right, back to bigger animals. I got kind of bogged down in the little guys. I used to study plankton and diatoms back in the day, so I'm a big fan of the little ones. But so there's some really, really cool megafauna, some really big animals that you can find too. So in addition to those crabs that the birds are eating, the birds are also going to be looking for some other organisms, things like fish. There are so many fish living in the water out there. I'm going to move this so you can see the marsh behind me, because that's the real view here. So in that water behind me are tons of fish. This is a really important nursery area for a lot of commercially important fish. These aren't fish, but shrimp are one of the things you can find in the waters here that a lot of animals like to eat. You'll find mullet, you'll find bass, you'll find spot-tailed bass or red drum, depending on who you ask what their name is. You'll find all kinds of fish in there, and that's gonna both form a layer of the food chain for bigger animals, and they'll also become larger animals, so they can spend the first part of their life in the salt marsh and then move out to the open ocean to live out the rest of their life as they grow. All right, so we got birds, we got fish, we have arthropods. Another really cool arthropod that you might find is a horseshoe crab. I didn't find one here today. They do tend to stay a little bit deeper, but you often will find their molts on either the beach or on the shoreline at the marsh. In the high areas, you might find some molts. Being arthropods, they do still shed that exoskeleton as they grow, so you might not find a dead horseshoe crab like you thought. It might be just that shell that it left behind. You can look for an opening at the front of that horseshoe shape. On the bottom is where they'll crawl out and go forward. So if you see that hole, just a molt. It'll still have the gills and the legs and everything and look just like a live horseshoe crab, but it's not necessarily just a dead one. All right, so we have our arthropods, fish, birds. What else is in the salt marsh? What other groups are there? We've got reptiles. So reptiles, not always people people's favorite group, but I think they're really, really cool. Earlier we were walking in the marsh and we saw a banded water snake. It's a non-venomous snake. It wasn't actually in the water, it was in the upland forested area, but you'll find those there since there are so many birds and other animals that are coming to this buffet behind me. That leads to a lot of diversity on the land next to the marsh as well. So you'll have snakes, sometimes venomous snakes, usually non-venomous, but in those forested wooded areas you can expect some of the copperheads and, you know, the multiple, or the common culprits as you might call them. But mostly non-venomous snakes like rat snakes or water snakes, things like that. You'll also find some reptiles that people are a little more fond of, things like lizards. You can find little anoles, little green lizards darting around in here. You can find turtles. Turtles, everybody loves them, right? So you might find some small turtles like terrapins. Terrapins are one of the few species that actually spend their whole life, a few reptile species that spend their entire life in the marsh. There are some other kinds of turtles that would migrate at different times of their life. Those are the ones that everybody loves. Sea turtles. So sea turtles will sometimes go through the marsh. You can find loggerheads here, but especially green sea turtles. Young green sea turtles will live a lot of their life in the marsh here, or their early life I should say, because as they grow older, they'll need more greens. Now on this oyster shell is some sea lettuce. This is a plant that a lot of organisms in the marsh would like to eat if they are herbivorous, and that sea lettuce is a really favorite food of the young green sea turtles. But as they get bigger, they can get up to more than 400 pounds, and the little bit of sea lettuce that we have here is not going to be enough to sustain an adult green sea turtle. So they'll spend their adult life down in Florida and the Caribbean, those areas with more seagrass beds. But while they're little guys, we might get them here in South Carolina during the summers and when the water's nice and warm. The terrapins though, they're here all the time. This is their habitat. This is where they live. This is where they call it home. And those ones you can recognize by that black and white speckled pattern on their head, and they have sort of a ridged back, which is where they get that diamondback name. They have a really cool adaptation because they still need to get rid of salt like everything here. They still need fresh water. What they might do when it's raining, they can get this small layer of fresh water on the surface of the water, or if that's not enough fresh water for them, they can actually open their mouth and catch raindrops as they fall to make sure that they get enough fresh water. It's a really cool adaptation that they have. All right, I think that about does it for reptiles. Yeah? All right, so let's move on to our next group. This one's another favorite, mammals. Being mammals ourselves, we are kind of predisposed to enjoying mammals. So some of the mammals that you might see, I haven't seen any today, but typically, I think this is the first time that I've been here that I haven't seen dolphin fins poking up in the water behind me. They're coming for that buffet just like everybody else. So dolphins will make a habit of coming into the marshes. In South Carolina, in the softer areas, you'll actually see them strand feeding, which is a really cool behavior where they'll push a wave of water. They'll work together to push the water up, and with that water that comes up onto the bank of the marsh will also come fish, and they can eat those. You can tell if a dolphin is a strand feeder just by looking at the right side of its jaw. It'll be worn down from that fine sediment over time so that you can see those teeth kind of ground down a little bit as they've rubbed up, as they beach themselves intentionally to grab those fish and go back down into the marsh. Not all dolphins do this, and it is a learned behavior that they all strand feed on that same side. It's really interesting. All right, so dolphins are a common visitor to the marsh. I'm looking again to see if there's any out here, but I don't see any right this second. And then some other mammals that you might see are things like raccoons. They'll come through and pick up some crabs and some delicious yummy fish, things like that. You'll see little footprints in the marsh. I've never seen a raccoon personally with my eyes here, but I have seen tracks quite often. I could also be confusing those tracks with otter tracks. We don't have sea otters here on the East Coast, but we do have river otters. And despite their name, they don't always stay in the rivers. They can also make their way into the marshes, into those estuarine areas. And so those estuaries, that has that brackish water, but river otters can still make their way here and eat some of the fish and things in here. Got another question that's asked, do we have whales? Absolutely. Off of our coast we do get whales. We have, I believe, right whales make an appearance off of our coast. Sometimes gray whales as well. I'm not as well versed on whales, but you can visit the NOAA website to find out more about the geographic ranges of different species of whales. occasionally there have been some sightings of orcas off of our coast too, as they migrate through the ocean. Another mammal that you might see here are manatees. You would only see them when the water is nice and warm because they do like really, really warm water, but manatees have often been seen off of Patriots Point. They hang out down at the base of the ship sometimes, and then you'll see them off of docks and things like that as well. Another mammal that you wouldn't think of being in the marsh, but is often, is a deer. Deer will come, they really like salt. If you think about salt licks with deer, they can get the salt lick off of the marsh grass. It's delicious. So they can come and get that salt. The last mammal I'm going to talk about is one that we are all very, very familiar with. People. You can find people in the marsh. And people will use the marsh for all kinds of things. It provides a lot of services for us, whether we think about them or not. I've seen a lot of fishing boats out behind me. That's one of the most common reasons that people appreciate the marsh and use the marsh. So it is a rich food source, not just for the animals that live in it, but for the people who visit it. And they also like to use it for recreation. Even if they're not fishing for sustenance, that is a form of recreation as well. But you can use it for walking along the beach and looking for those fiddler crabs and just enjoying it. You can go kayaking in it. I wouldn't necessarily swim right off the marsh because one of the last organisms that I want to talk about that I forgot was this right here. These are oysters. They are very, very sharp. So if you do go to the marsh, make sure that you're wearing proper footwear. They will slice at the bottom of your feet pretty quick there. So you might see them just coming out to enjoy the marsh. And so those are two of the services that the marsh can provide for us. Those are called ecosystem services, things that this ecosystem provides for us and does for us. So we have food and fishing, we have recreation, and ecosystem services aren't just for people. They provide for the organisms that live here too. So some of the other services that the salt marsh provides are, it's a nursery, like I said before. So this nursery is going to host all of those young fish and young animals before they make their way out into the big scary ocean. And so that's going to provide a safe place, especially in the winter, for those organisms to stay before they move out into the open ocean. So we have a nursery, we have food, we have recreation. We also really rely on the marsh during this time of year and during the fall. We are already seeing a couple of named storms off of the East Coast, which is a little bit frightening, but luckily for us, we have this amazing habitat behind me. We have our marshes to help protect us. So one of the services that it provides is flood mitigation. That pluff mud that I was talking about before, that forms that stinky base layer of the marsh, is a really good absorber. It's like a sponge, it holds a lot of water. So as that tide comes in, as that storm surge comes in, that pluff mud will help absorb it and keep some of that water from getting further inland. There's only so much it can do when there's a giant storm surge and we live right next to the water, but it does a pretty good job. The Spartina also forms a barrier for waves to help absorb some of that wave energy as well as the hurricanes come in. The other way that a salt marsh can help us is by it being a filter. The Spartina, as our fresh water comes in from upstream and upstate, it will block that and act as a filter to catch any kind of pollutants. You'll find a lot of heavy metals and chemical pollutants that get stuck down in the mud as well, and that is going to be used up by bacteria and things that live down there. And so it helps to keep our oceans clean and keep some of those pollutants, both physical and chemical, from getting out into the ocean. Another filtration system in the marsh, besides the grass and the mud itself, is these organisms right here, these eastern oysters. We like to eat them, we appreciate them for their food value, but we should also appreciate them for their filtration value. These bivalves, these snail-like animals with two shells, they're filter feeders. And one oyster can filter more than 50 gallons of water in one day. It's impressive. So we have a huge number of oysters here now, luckily, thanks to some restoration efforts that help to clean and purify that water. When we look at salt marsh water, we don't always think of it as being super clear or super clean, but just because it's got silt and sediment in it does not mean that it's not clean water. So this is still really, really high quality, really good water that's got lots of nutrients and good things in it, thanks to our oysters and thanks to our other filter feeders in the water. The last ecosystem service that I'll mention is its ability to sequester carbon, to hold carbon. So as we have climate change, as we have a lot of carbon emissions going into our atmosphere, the salt marsh is actually really good at taking that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and putting it into a form that will stay down in that sediment and holding on to that carbon dioxide so that it doesn't go into the ocean and acidify it and doesn't stay in the atmosphere and cause greenhouse gases to cause issues in the atmosphere itself. So our salt marsh, while it looks unassuming, as beautiful as it is, it's doing a lot for us. It's got a really important job. So hopefully today you've learned a couple of things about why you should appreciate the salt marsh, and I want to leave you with a couple of things that you can do to help the salt marsh. You can participate in local restoration efforts like our Seeds to Shoreline program. Shameless plug, but we are opening up registration this week for our Seeds to Shoreline teacher program. It's a program where you grow Spartina, this amazing smooth cordgrass, in your classroom and then transplant it into the marsh at the end of the year and help restore areas that need some help. So you can take part in our Seeds to Shoreline program, which Evie will put in the comments for you if you're interested in. You can also participate in things like DNR's SCORE program. It's an oyster restoration program. Those oysters, in addition to filtering out the water and getting all the stuff out of the water, they also form a solid substrate, a solid bottom to attach to for other things and hold some of that sediment so that it doesn't go into the ocean and just erode away. Right now, a lot of those volunteer efforts are kind of on pause due to coronavirus, but make sure that you keep up with them and see when it's possible for you to go out and help them again. If there's anything that you wanted to learn more about, if you are really interested in the salt marsh, which hopefully you are at the end of this, we also have our Salt Marsh Guide, which is a publication put together by a couple of different partners, Clemson and DNR and Sea Grant, that has a lot of really accessible, useful information for the layperson who might not be a scientist. It's a great field guide to the salt marsh. All right, I want to open it up to see if anybody has any more questions. I know I'm definitely over 30 minutes here. I could probably talk about the salt marsh for like 3 weeks, but I want to open it up to see if anybody had any questions. I'm not sure if I can see any comments, so let me see real quick. Nope, can't see comments on here. So hopefully you didn't have questions, but if you do have any questions, be sure to send those over to Sea Grant. You can go to our website, South Carolina Sea Grant, scseagrant.org. Evie will put it in the comments because it makes a whole lot more sense clicking on a link than me saying a link out loud. But you can go to our education page, learn about the resources that we have, look into our Seeds to Shoreline program, and find our contact information to ask us any salt marsh questions that you have. Believe me, we love talking about the salt marsh, so please send those to us and we would be happy to help you out with those. All right, I just got a question texted to me. What is my favorite part of the marsh? That's a good question. Honestly, I really love putting on some tall boots and mucking around in the pluff mud. I think the pluff mud is my favorite part of the whole marsh. I didn't really go into it that much, but without pluff mud, none of this would be possible. When I first moved to South Carolina, I didn't really know a lot about the salt marsh, and I just drove by the salt marsh with windows down, and I was like, oof. What is wrong with this area? Is there a sewage leak? Is there something going on? Because it smells like rotten eggs. There's hydrogen sulfide coming out because of the colony of bacteria and fungus and invertebrates that are breaking this down and going through anaerobic respiration. And I think that whole system is my favorite part of the marsh because it forms the basis for the Spartina to grow. It allows all of these organisms enough nutrients so that they can make a living here. And it feels really cool. Don't go in the salt marsh with shoes that you're too attached to if they're not very tall and very well attached to your feet, because that pluff mud, the name comes from plowing because it used to be used as fertilizer, but it also is about the sound that it makes when you walk through it. It's kind of like a poof, poof. So it's also an onomatopoeia, not just a descriptive word. But I think that's my favorite part. It's hard to pick, honestly. Just go to the salt marsh and see what your favorite part is, because it's like choosing a favorite child. It's all the best. All right, with that, I want to encourage you to go out, go to your county parks, go to places safely, maintain your distance, but enjoy the natural habitats that are around you and really get a feel for why these places are so important, both in terms of your personal value and what you value about them, what you appreciate about them, but also what they do for the ecosystem and for the habitat that you live in. Thanks for joining us. Our next educator helpline is actually going to be on Thursday. We're doubling up this week because of the hurricane that didn't actually come last week, but we thought was going to rain us out. So on Thursday at 4 p.m., we are going to be talking about human impacts on the ocean and how we are connected to the ocean. So check that out. That's going to be here again, 4 o'clock, Facebook, Thursday, human impacts. All right. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And get out and enjoy the marsh. Bye, guys.